Hello and welcome to the Informed Animal Ally presented by the Vancouver Humane Society. This is the Animal Ethics Podcast where we share the ins and outs of topics like cruelty, legislation, and advocacy here in BC and across Canada. Hi, I'm Chantal Archambault, Communications Director for the Vancouver Humane Society. Here on the Informed Animal Ally, we've spoken in depth about animal cruelty laws, the realities of animals living in our society, what good well-being looks like for animals, how we can help animals, and so much more. Today, I'd like to take a step back and look at one of the reasons this work is so important to all of us as animal allies: the connections we feel with animals on an individual level. For me, I've always seen and felt that every animal's life has value. I remember distinctly that when I was a child, I hated seeing people walking over worms and squishing them. So each time it rained, I would run outside with my boots and coat and pick up every worm off the driveway before my dad could leave the house and drive off to work. As animal allies, we know each animal is an individual with their own personality, thoughts, dreams, and motivations. We know that each animal's life and well-being matters. This month, some animal allies will be sharing interactions they've had with animals who have touched their lives and motivated them to do the work that they do. First, I'd like to introduce Amy Morris, the Executive Director here at the Vancouver Humane Society. Amy joined the VHS in early 2020. She has a wide experience in the animal protection movement, including campaigning for policy changes at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels to curtail animal exploitation. Amy is sharing a story about a duck named Fennel, about building a bond with an animal, and about letting go.
Hi, I'm Amy Morris. I'm the Executive Director of Vancouver Humane Society. The animal that most touched my life was a duck that I named Fennel. A friend had a number of chickens and ducks on her property, and one of the chickens was sitting on a nest of duck eggs. She had pushed the mama duck off the nest, and when the duckling hatched, she rejected it. So she basically moved them off of the nest and pushed them onto the ground, and then no one was willing to take care or responsibility for this brand new duckling. And my friend had a lot going on, and she reached out to me and said, what do you think about raising this duckling, this rejected duckling? And I definitely thought twice about it. I never raised a duckling, and I didn't know what, the next 10 years could look like if I raised this duck and kept them. And so I thought about it a bit and then agreed and set this little duckling up in a box with a heat lamp and food and water. And I was really nervous. I was nervous that they wouldn't survive, that, I'd have to deal with the potential sadness of a loss. And I just every day woke up to these cute little peeping sounds, and I would take the duckling out and take them, to check out worms and find little bodies of water and get them swimming. And I got to watch them progress just one little step at a time of bathing and learning to wash their body and watching every feather come out and the changes in the feathers, and help them learn how to forage in the garden. I showed them kind of how to dig for worms and look under leaves, and they would make these cute, happy noises. It was a Muscovy duck, and so they actually shake their tails. So they would wag their little tail when they were happy and just follow me around. Everywhere I went, they were with me, right almost under my feet. And I also kind of taught my pup to learn how to kind of be around a young duckling. And Clover was really curious about this duck we called Fennel. Sometimes I would just be sitting on a bench with the both of them, just relaxing and petting Fennel. And the thing that I learned about Muscovy ducks is that when they get older, they're not sort of domesticated. They're still pretty wild. And so gradually Fennel stopped wanting to interact. There were mirrors that Fennel was sort of staying in front of in the pond. And I realized that Fennel wanted to be with her own kind. So we brought Fennel back over to the farm that she came from, not knowing what would happen. And she was able to reintegrate. She hung out with all the ducklings that were kind of in her age group, and they did their own thing different than the older ducklings. And she was able to be part of a flock again. And she really taught me how to trust and love, and also how to let go and, know what's best. And it was just such a process of a bond with an animal, and then seeing later where the bond wasn't so meaningful or important to her anymore, and feeling happiness in that she got to a place where she could be with her own kind and do Fennel type activities that, maybe flying to the top of something as a group and hanging out there, that she was able to find her own happiness. And I found happiness in that. Later on, I had some friends who ordered duck, something to eat, and it really had me reflecting on what it was to make that choice after I had experienced this such deep bond with this beautiful Fennel. And I found it really interesting to think about how there can be such a juxtaposition of camaraderie and friendship with beautiful animals, and have people feel comfortable with eating them. And certainly it had me reflecting on all of the other animals that people feel comfortable with eating, and what it would look like if they could spend time with those animals and raise them and be close with them. And just a real reflection and curiosity and growth there. I am grateful for the time I got to spend with Fennel, and she certainly had me reflecting every single day.
The next story is from Danielle George. Danielle is a member of the board of directors for the Vancouver Humane Society. She became a vegetarian at the age of 12 after reading The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and transitioned to veganism in her mid-20s as she was on her way to a Weird Al concert. She's passionate about food, social justice, and animal welfare, and believes they have many crucial intersections, which she spoke about on our episode, Is It Easy to Go Vegan?, from September 2023. Here's Danielle's story about how she came to understand that having the best intentions doesn't always mean that we're making the best choices for animals.
An animal that has touched my life that isn't a cat or a dog, I think, would be a milk jug full of grasshoppers. When I was a young girl growing up in Kansas, I was in the 3rd grade, I loved any kind of animal. All animals, I was crazy about them. It was a big part of my personality, and that included grasshoppers and insects in general. I was fascinated with insects and spiders, and I wanted to have animals in my life however I could, and I couldn't have pets at that time. So the loophole that I kind of navigated through that space was, okay, well, I'm going to collect grasshoppers, and I'm going to build them a little home in this empty milk jug. I'm going to fill it with sticks and twigs and rocks, and I'm going to get 15 or so grasshoppers. And it's not doing anyone any harm, as I perceived it at the time, because no one else has to worry about taking care of them or feeding them. They aren't taking up that much space. They can't make a mess in the house. So I was totally obsessed with these grasshoppers. I took them to school for show and tell, and I remember the teacher having to say, can you set your milk jug full of grasshoppers outside of the classroom door, because they were hopping and it sounded like popping corn. It was just very distracting as we were all carrying on with the rest of our school day. I would come and check in on them daily. I was going and picking all kinds of food for them and putting it in the bottle. And just constantly, being this ever watchful, benevolent, loving eye through the milk jug hole. And I remember at the time thinking, the lessons that I am learning is how to care for animals, and what do grasshoppers do, and how do they live their lives. And I'm being a scientist. I'm learning something right now. I'm informing myself. I'm doing an experiment. I am observing animals in their natural habitat. So I'm going to be able to learn about grasshoppers as a part of this. But I think as I've gotten older and farther away from my third grade self with her milk jug full of grasshoppers, I come back to remembering having them because I can remember what inspired that, right? I want to feel close to nature. I want to feel close to animals. I love animals, and I can create this perfect environment where we both get something. They get to be away from predators. They don't have to worry about birds or cats or snakes or anything else that's going to eat them. And they don't have to worry about rain or weather, and all of their food will be taken care of. And I've built them kind of this perfect little community. And then I get to take care of them, love them, observe them, learn from them. And so we both win. Like, they get the life of their dreams, and then I get to love them. And as I've gotten older, I've been able to kind of revisit that relationship and my perception of that relationship. And I have carried it through with almost all other times that I have interacted and engaged with animals, because I am so much more aware of how a completely well-meaning love and fascination and admiration for a being or an animal is not enough. It's not enough to justify taking that animal away from its natural environment, from its own community, from preventing it from having freedom of movement, from preventing it from having freedom to leave a space it doesn't want to, or to eat what it wants to, or to mate with whom it wants to do its natural behaviors. And when you are so far removed, we couldn't even communicate, right? Like, there was no way I could feel so confident that I knew what these grasshoppers needed, and that I was giving them everything that was their heart's desire. And even if I were, again, at the end of the day, if the heart's desire is I want to be a free being moving throughout the world, that was the one thing that was the cost for my love. So as I move through the rest of my life, further and further away from that third grader with a milk jug full of grasshoppers, I look back on and reflect on the lessons that they taught me, and what I thought I was learning in that moment, and what I have continued to learn from just that one experience all the time. I think about them at least once a year. And I relearn that lesson over and over again, because it is prevalent throughout a lot of the places that we move and a lot of the causes that appeal to us. I really, really appreciate those grasshoppers. I knew all their names. I had such big thoughts about them, and I continue to think about them decades later.
Next up, we have a story from Diane of the Happy Herd Farm Sanctuary in Langley Township, British Columbia. Diane became vegan about 10 years ago, and now in her 70s works with rescued farmed animals 7 days a week, providing care and a loving forever home. Diane is sharing a story of the Happy Herd's most recent arrival, Noodles.
Hi, this is Diane from the Happy Herd. I was asked to share a story about an animal that has really touched our lives. And our latest resident is Noodles. And Noodles arrived last May as a 2-week-old Icelandic sheep whose mother had rejected him because he had neurological issues. Noodles is currently somewhere around 10 months old, and his brain does not fire properly signals to his back end. So he has a tendency to walk like a drunken sailor. And as he's getting older, it's almost getting worse. We took Noodles to the vet last week and had x-rays done, hoping that there was something we could do for his hips to bring his legs together better so that he wasn't constantly falling down. And unfortunately, his skeleton structure is perfect. His hips are in place, and that was bad news because there's now nothing we can do other than keep him comfortable. So what we've done over the last week is had him locked in a smaller stall area and built an indoor-outdoor section for him. And he stays in that, and then in the morning when we have volunteers here to help, we let him out to wander around. And already we're seeing a change in him. He doesn't seem as frantic, and he's not falling down as much. So as a backup, we've had a donation of a wheelchair, a 2-wheeled wheelchair. And if he starts to go downhill again, he'll end up in that wheelchair. But we love this little guy, and he's stolen the hearts of everybody who's met him because he's so positive. He's so happy. He just wants to live. And he's already lived far past what the vets figured he would. So he's just bringing joy to us every single day. That's Noodles.
Now I'd like to introduce another story about a farmed animal sanctuary from the Vancouver Humane Society's Program Manager for Farmed Animal Programs, Heather Whitehead. Heather has worked and volunteered in a variety of areas such as climate action and sustainability, animal rescue, youth employment, community engagement, and plant-based advocacy. Here she's sharing a story of meeting Milton, a cow who has touched many lives since he was rescued from the dairy and veal industry.
So I've been to a few farm sanctuaries before and have met a lot of amazing animals and really got to see them for who they are as individuals. But one memory I have in particular is a few years ago when I went to Farm Sanctuary in New York State. So it's called Farm Sanctuary. That's the name of the sanctuary. It's a really big sanctuary in the States. I believe they have a location in California as well. So I went there for a weekend, and that was the main reason I went to New York, is I wanted to go to this farm sanctuary. And I did a tour of the grounds, and you could also just walk around a little bit. And so I met a bunch of different animals, some turkeys, some goats. But I remember meeting one cow in particular. His name is Milton. And at the time he was a baby, just a baby cow. And I'm sure he's ginormous now. But at the time he was just a little cow. And he had been rescued from the dairy industry because he is a male calf born in the dairy industry. So they're typically, not seen as valuable to dairy farmers. And so they're typically sold for veal or for beef. But Milton got sick. And so he wasn't able to be sold by the farmer. And so the farmer ended up giving him up, and Farm Sanctuary took him in, and he was able to get the help he needed. So I walked up and I saw him in his little area that he had, and a staff member was feeding him milk, which was really sweet. But then, you just watch him, and I ended up just standing there for a few minutes, just watching him live his life and be happy. And it was really incredible to watch, actually, because he was just a tiny baby cow, and he had the biggest eyes that would just melt your heart. I could see the life and the zest for life that he had behind those eyes. He was, doing zoomies in his little grass area that he had, just typically like our dogs and our cats. And I was able to just see how intelligent and how caring these animals are through just literally just watching him. Whenever I have the chance to see and meet a farmed animal, I always just take the time to see and feel the story behind their eyes. And just like any other animal, they want love and to live their life how they want to live. And with Milton in particular, it was, I feel like, very powerful because he probably would have, and a lot of these animals would have been slaughtered very early on in his life and not live in a very happy life. But now at Farm Sanctuary, he was able to just do whatever he wanted, do zoomies like a dog, like my dog does zoomies. And it was very, very similar to that. They can feel just the same as our dogs and our cats. And whenever I go to Farm Sanctuary, I'm often volunteering, actually. So, doing labor like picking up poop or fixing, hen house or something like that. So it's often hard labor, but farm sanctuaries have always been one of the places where I feel most at peace because I'm just able to watch these animals live the happy lives that they deserve.
Finally, I'd like to introduce Kat Lepinen, the Vancouver Humane Society's Development Coordinator. Kat believes in justice for humans and animals alike, and is sharing a story about how her interest in mice as a young child evolved into a realization that the animals we love and care for can be the same species that are treated with contempt and made to suffer.
My name is Kat. I work here at the Vancouver Humane Society, and my life has been touched by, I guess not specifically one mouse, but by mice in general. I have always really loved them. That goes back to when I was a kid, and I got a stuffed mouse toy in a McDonald's Happy Meal. I guess McDonald's was doing like a partnership with Babe, the movie that had just come out. It was the 90s. They had all the animal characters from the movie available in Happy Meals, which is a wild collaboration. It's like nobody at McDonald's watched that movie or understood the message at all. I received this toy, little toy mouse that I named Mousy, and just loved Mousy. I still have Mousy. Mousy's doing fantastic. But it got me interested in mice, and I got out, different books from the library, and then eventually convinced my parents to let us adopt some mice. We adopted 2 mice. I named them Mary Kate and Ashley after the Olsen twins. It was again the 90s, and I loved Mary Kate and Ashley, the twins, as much as I loved mice. I loved those mice. I had like a little diary where I would write stories about Mary Kate and Ashley the mice and what they were up to every day and observations about them. And I considered the mice to be family members, and I think the same way that so many of us consider cats and dogs to be members of our family. Then I got thinking about mice a little bit more. Recently, a couple of years ago, I kind of came across my first glue trap that I had ever seen, and I was horrified. There were 3 mice trapped on the trap, and they were screaming, so clearly suffering, so clearly in pain. Who knows how long they had been there. It was atrocious. I couldn't believe that glue traps were allowed, and it got me thinking a little bit about how I have been so shielded from having to see animal suffering in my life. And yeah, I just started to kind of explore that a little bit more, got thinking about farmed animals as well, and led to me becoming vegan and volunteering at the Vancouver Humane Society, and now I, of course, work here, and I think about those mice a lot, and I know that so many of the Vancouver Humane Society's supporters signed the petition calling for a ban on glue traps, which is, I think, great. The more we can have conversations about animal lives and animal exploitation and animal suffering, the more we can kind of create a better future for all these creatures, including mice, who deserve to live their own meaningful lives.
Thank you for listening to our stories about the animals who have touched our lives here on the Informed Animal Ally. And if you work in the animal services sector or work in social or human services with people who have companion animals, please stay tuned for another learning opportunity with the Vancouver Humane Society. Visit humanecanada.ca and check out the Summit for Animals to learn more. The VHS's program manager, Sarita Lopez, will be joining Dylan Dodson from the Toronto Humane Society at Humane Canada's Summit for Animals, which will take place May 5th to 7th at the Halifax Convention Centre in Nova Scotia. The session, entitled The Importance of Trauma-Informed Approaches and Veterinary Social Work for Building Resilience in Animal Service Organizations, will be part of the optional Learning Labs Day on May 5th from 10:45 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. local time. Working within the animal services sector impacts us emotionally, socially, psychologically, and spiritually. Because of that, it carries a high risk of leaving us feeling stressed and experiencing burnout, or even more deeply, experiencing vicarious trauma or secondary traumatic stress. The session aims to address these challenges by equipping animal service providers with the essential tools to promote well-being and cultivate resilience. In the session, you'll explore how adopting a trauma-informed approach not only enhances interactions with animal guardians, but also supports team members and organizations. The session will also discuss the role of social work in animal welfare and how veterinary social workers can play a pivotal role in building organizational culture and wellness. In this interactive session, you'll gain valuable insights and strategies to enhance your well-being and effectiveness as an animal service provider. This is a working session where participants will be invited to engage in exercises to explore their current wellness and create action plans based on these findings. Participants will learn strategies that can be applied right away to help manage compassion fatigue and prevent burnout, and build a more compassionate and resilient community, both for the animals we care for and the people who love them. To sign up, visit humanecanada.ca or reg.eventmobi.com/Summit for Animals. That's reg.eventmobi.com/summit4animals. Thank you for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next month as we discuss farmed animal cruelty cases in British Columbia over the last decade. The Informed Animal Ally is a podcast by the Vancouver Humane Society. If you found this episode helpful, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more supporters of animals. To support this project and other initiatives to build a kinder world for animals, you can make a donation at vancouverhumane.ca. You can also follow the Vancouver Humane Society on Facebook at Vancouver Humane Society, Instagram at Vancouver Humane, or Twitter at VanHumane. The music in this episode is the song Jonah's Message for New York by Dr. Turtle, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International Public License. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being an animal ally.